The wind howls a mournful dirge through the skeletal remains of Blackwood Castle. It is a place where stone has learned to weep, where every shadow clings to the walls like a shroud. Ivy, thick as a hangman's rope, chokes the life from crumbling towers that claw at a perpetually gray sky. Within this carcass of a kingdom lies a single, undisturbed enigma, a heavy oak door, high in the forgotten northern spire, sealed not with a simple lock but with iron bands and rusted rivets, hammered into the very frame of the wall. There is no keyhole, no handle. It was never meant to be opened again. Locals, their voices hushed with generations of inherited fear, don't speak of who was sealed inside. They only speak of the silence that followed, a silence so profound it seemed to swallow the light. They say that on the quietest nights, if you stand at the base of the spire, you can hear a sound that is not the wind. It is the faint, almost imperceptible rustle of a silk wedding gown, a lonely bride waiting for a groom who would never arrive, a sound echoing from the tomb of a forgotten promise. This is not a tale of heroes. It is a ghost story carved into the memory of a fallen dynasty, a testament to how the most beautiful flowers are often the first to be crushed in the race for a thorny crown. Before the crown, there was only the man Alaric. He was not born to rule. He was forged in the cold mud of border skirmishes and the grim politics of the sword. His ambition was a chilling fire, burning away all traces of mercy. He saw the world not as a home, but as a board of conquests with men as his pawns. His eyes, the color of a winter storm, held no warmth, only the glint of appraisal and calculation. He rose through the ranks of the old king's army, his loyalty a carefully constructed mask hiding a serpent's heart. He did not seize the throne in a glorious battle, but in a whisper campaign of poison, blackmail, and a single, swift blade in a darkened corridor. When he finally placed the heavy, cold crown upon his own head, the kingdom did not cheer. It held its breath. King Alaric ruled with an iron scepter, his decrees etched in fear. He built magnificent monuments to his own glory, their foundations mixed with the blood and sweat of his people. He believed power was not a gift to be cherished, but a weapon to be wielded, and he pointed it at everyone, trusting no one, for he knew better than anyone how easily a loyal servant could become a king's murderer. To legitimize his bloody ascension, Alaric required a queen of noble, untainted lineage. His choice fell upon Lady Seraphina of the Sunken Isles, a woman whose beauty was sung by bards across 5 kingdoms. She arrived not as a lover, but as the final, most valuable piece of a political treaty, her dowry replenishing the kingdom's war-drained coffers. Seraphina was a stark contrast to the grim court she now commanded. Where the palace was gray stone and cold iron, she was ivory and gold. Her wisdom was as renowned as her beauty, her words a gentle melody in a court accustomed to the clang of armor and the hiss of conspirators. She moved through the oppressive halls of Blackwood like a sliver of moonlight, her grace a silent rebuke to the brutality that had built them. The king saw her as his most prized possession, a beautiful testament to his power. But in her quiet moments, when she stood on the high balconies overlooking his grim, sprawling kingdom, her eyes held a profound sorrow. She was a dove in a cage of wolves, a queen in name but a prisoner in soul, brought to a land of shadows to lend it a light she knew. One day, it would inevitably extinguish. In the second year of the queen's gilded captivity, a child was born, a princess they named Alara. She was a fragile miracle, a single white bloom in a garden of thorns. For a fleeting moment, her birth seemed to thaw the icy heart of the kingdom. The people, starved for a symbol of hope, celebrated her arrival. They saw in her the mother's grace, and they prayed, none of the father's cold ambition. Queen Seraphina poured all of her stifled love and silent prayers into the child, seeing Alara not as a future political asset, but as the only pure thing in her life. The king, however, saw something different. In the infant's delicate features, he saw the continuation of his bloodline, a new piece for the dynastic game. He would gift her a kingdom, he vowed, but it would be a kingdom she would secure for him through a strategic marriage. The nursery was filled with the finest silks and handcrafted toys, but it was bordered by the same cold stone and creeping shadows that defined the rest of the palace. Hope had been born, yes, but it was born into a cage, its destiny already being written by the cold, calculating hand of its father. Princess Alara's first breaths were of the stale, fearful air of a court where innocence was merely a prelude to sacrifice. As Princess Alara grew, so too did the shadows that writhed. In the corners of Blackwood Castle, the court was a viper's nest, where loyalty was a currency traded for whispers and secrets were daggers wielded in the dark. The king's chief advisor, Lord Valerius, was a man whose face seemed carved from old parchment, his eyes small and sharp like a rat's. He cultivated the king's paranoia, feeding it with fabricated plots and half-truths, ensuring his own position remained secure. Valerius saw the queen not as a noble lady, but as a foreign influence, her quiet wisdom a threat to his own counsel. He fanned the flames of envy among the lesser lords, who resented the queen's gentle influence and the affection the people held for her and the young princess. Whispers followed Queen Seraphina down the long, echoing corridors, whispers of her foreign blood, of her secret sorrows, of her supposed disdain for the king's strong rule. The palace itself seemed to conspire against her. Its tapestries depicted brutal battles, its statues were of grim, faceless warriors, and its architecture was designed to intimidate, to remind all who walked its halls that they were subject to the king's absolute, suffocating power. It was a home built not for comfort, but for control. King Alaric's hunger for power was a bottomless abyss. The kingdom he had seized was not enough. He craved the world. His ambition became a fever that burned in his blood, driving him to launch one brutal campaign after another. He bled the countryside dry, levying crippling taxes to fund his ever-expanding armies. Sons were ripped from their families, harvests were confiscated, and dissent was crushed with merciless efficiency. The cheers that had once, however reluctantly, greeted his processions turned into sullen silence. His victories on the battlefield brought no prosperity home, only more widows and orphans. This insatiable greed isolated him completely. He saw betrayal lurking behind every friendly face, even his wife's. He began to resent Queen Seraphina's quiet dignity, misinterpreting her pleas for peace as a challenge to his authority, her wisdom as a silent condemnation of his cruelty. He wanted not just to be feared, but to be the only power worth fearing. He began to spend more time with his generals and his spy master, Valerius, than with his own family, the throne room becoming a chamber of war maps and execution orders, while the queen and princess were left to the chilling silence of their gilded apartments. The queen's world shrank with each passing day. The walls of Blackwood Castle, once just a home, now felt like the cold, unyielding walls of a tomb. Her laughter, once a rare music in the grim halls, faded into a resigned sigh. She walked the royal gardens, a manicured prison where even the roses seemed to have more thorns than blossoms. She tried to shield Princess Alara from the court's pervasive darkness, reading her stories of sunnier, kinder lands, lands like the one she had been stolen from. The queen's pain was a silent, private affair. She would stand for hours at her window, gazing towards a horizon she would never reach, her tears falling onto the cold marble windowsill, the only witness to her sorrow. She knew the king's ambition was a fire that would eventually consume them all. In her despair, a secret began to grow in her heart. It was not a secret of infidelity, as her enemies would later claim, but one of desperate hope, a clandestine correspondence with a sympathetic duke in a neighboring kingdom, a plea to form an alliance of reason against her husband's madness, a desperate attempt to save her people and her daughter from the abyss. It was a dangerous, treasonous gamble, a secret she guarded with her very soul. Princess Alara grew into a young woman of ethereal beauty, a mirror of her mother's grace, but with a heartbreaking fragility in her eyes. She was raised in a world of paradoxes, taught the art of diplomacy while surrounded by brute force, instructed in courtly grace amidst a nest of vipers, and told of her kingdom's glory while seeing the fear in the eyes of the servants. Her only true friend was a young musician in the court, a boy whose gentle melodies offered a brief escape from the oppressive silence of her life. They would meet in secret corners of the garden, their innocent connection a tiny flame of warmth in the encroaching cold. But in the king's court, innocence was a liability. Her destiny was not her own to forge. The king saw her not as a daughter, but as his most valuable bargaining chip. Suitors from powerful, ruthless kingdoms were already being considered. She was to be a bride, a seal on an alliance that would further her father's bloody conquests. Ilara was a lamb being raised for slaughter, adorned in silk and jewels, her future a path leading inexorably towards a sacrifice on the altar of her father's ambition. She could feel the net closing around her, a beautiful, gilded net from which there was no escape. The serpent finally struck, Lord Vale. Rias, the king's spymaster, his network of spies as pervasive as cobwebs in the castle's dungeons, intercepted one of the queen's secret letters. The correspondence with the foreign duke, a desperate plea for a peaceful intervention, was all the proof he needed. He twisted its meaning with venomous skill, reframing the queen's desperate diplomacy as a plot of high treason, an attempt to overthrow the king and place a foreign power on the throne. He concocted a narrative of a secret affair, suggesting her meetings with the court musician were a cover for passing messages to her lover, the duke. He laid this poisoned tapestry before King Alaric, whose mind was already a fertile ground for paranoia. The king, seeing his own fears of betrayal given form, exploded in a rage that was terrifying in its totality. The carefully constructed peace of the royal apartments was shattered. He did not question, he did not investigate. He only saw the confirmation he had secretly sought for years, that everyone, even the woman who gave him a child, was his enemy. The queen's desperate gamble to save the kingdom had just signed her death warrant and sealed her daughter's fate. The king's rage, fueled by Valerius's poison, turned outward upon his kingdom. He declared the queen a traitor and unleashed a reign of terror, purging anyone with even the slightest connection to her. Nobles were executed, their lands seized. The last vestiges of goodwill his people held for him evaporated, replaced by a burning, incandescent hatred. The kingdom, already bled dry by his wars and famines, finally broke. The rebellion started not with an army, but with a farmer's pitchfork, then a village, then a whole province. It was a wildfire of desperation. The armies Alaric had sent to conquer foreign lands were now recalled to fight his own starving people, but their loyalty was fractured. The revolution reached the capital's gates. The people, driven by years of suffering and the story of their beloved queen's unjust condemnation, stormed the city. Fire consumed the opulent squares, and the cobblestones ran slick with the blood of loyalists and rebels alike. The impenetrable walls of Blackwood Castle were breached, the grand gates splintered by a battering ram swung by the hands of 1,000 vengeful citizens. The end had come, not from a foreign invader, but from within. The king did not allow the rebels the satisfaction of judging his queen. As the sounds of battle echoed through the palace, he stormed into her chambers, his face a mask of pure, undiluted fury. Serafina stood before him, not with fear, but with a profound, heartbreaking sorrow. There were no tears left. He didn't use a sword, that was a warrior's death, and in his eyes she was nothing but a common traitor. He held up a golden chalice, the same one they had used at their wedding feast. It was filled with a dark, viscous liquid, the swift and agonizing poison known as Night's Tear. He accused her of poisoning his reign, of destroying his legacy with her weakness and betrayal. Her pleas of innocence were nothing but air to him. He forced the chalice to her lips, holding her fast as she choked and convulsed. Her final moments were not spent looking at a loving husband, but at a monster, her killer. Her last breath was a silent scream that no one heard, her life extinguishing like a candle in a storm. She died on the cold stone floor, a tragic queen whose greatest crime was trying to bring light into a world that only craved darkness. When the rebels finally battered down the doors to the throne room, they did not find a defiant king ready for a final, glorious battle. They found Alaric alone, the crown askew on his head, his eyes wide with madness, staring at the blood on his hands. The fight was over. He was dragged from his throne not by a rival lord, but by the mud-caked hands of the commoners he had despised. They tore the royal finery from his body, parading him through the very streets where his statues once stood. His execution was a spectacle of brutal justice. He was not beheaded with a swift, clean stroke. He was thrown from the highest tower of his own castle, the same tower from which the queen used to gaze at the horizon. For a brief, terrible moment, he was a king who could fly. Then he plummeted, his screams swallowed by the wind, his body shattering on the courtyard stones below. The crown he had killed for lay dented and forgotten in the mud, a worthless trinket. His lust for an eternal legacy had earned him nothing but a traitor's death and a forgotten, unmarked grave. In the chaos, Princess Alara was found huddled in the royal chapel, clinging to a statue of a weeping saint. The new Revolutionary Council, a fractious group of grim-faced men, debated her fate. Some screamed for her execution, the last of the serpent's brood. Others, remembering her mother's kindness, argued for mercy. They settled on a fate they considered a form of poetry, a punishment far crueler than death. They saw her as a bride, the last bride of a dead dynasty. They dressed her in a magnificent white wedding gown, a relic from the royal treasury, its silk a stark contrast to the grime and blood of the rebellion. They placed a crown of withered flowers on her head. Then they led the silent, terrified princess up the winding stairs of the northern spire to the chamber they had prepared. They led her inside a room stripped of all but a simple bed and a single, high window. And then they left. The sound of the hammers began, sealing the heavy oak door with iron bands, each strike an echo of a closing coffin. She was not a prisoner to be ransomed or a princess to be exiled. She was an idea, a symbol of the old world, locked away forever. The bride in the tower, eternally waiting for a freedom that would never come. The kingdom freed from its tyrant did not flourish. It fractured. The rebel leaders, united only by their hatred for the king, soon turned on one another. The land bled anew, torn apart by petty warlords and feuding factions. Famine and plague, once held at bay by the kingdom's sheer, brutal order, now swept through the countryside unchecked. Blackwood Castle was looted and abandoned, its grand halls becoming a home for rats and ghosts. The throne room was stripped bare. The throne itself eventually burned for firewood during a particularly harsh winter. The story of the mad king and the tragic queen faded, distorted by time into a cautionary tale for children. And the princess? She was forgotten entirely. The sealed door in the northern spire became just another feature of the decaying castle, its purpose lost to memory. No one knew that behind the iron and oak, a life slowly, agonizingly faded away in solitude and silence. The silence of her tomb became the silence of the kingdom, a land broken and haunted, its brief moment of glory utterly erased, leaving behind nothing but ruins and the whisper of a terrible, forgotten sorrow. In the end, what is a kingdom but a collection of stories? And when those stories end in silence, the kingdom itself ceases to exist. King Alaric's burning ambition did not carve his name into eternity. It dug a grave deep enough for his entire world. He sought to control everything, and in doing so, lost it all. Queen Seraphina, a beacon of peace, became a catalyst for war, her goodness twisted into a weapon against her. Princess Alara, the symbol of a hopeful future, was made into a living monument of the past's failure, a bride locked forever in a chamber of regret. The stones of Blackwood Castle hold the truth, but they cannot speak. They stand as a silent testament to the idea that crowns are often forged from sorrow, thrones are built upon secrets, and the most heartbreaking histories are the ones that are never written down, left to be carried only by the mournful wind that blows through the ruins of a fallen dream. History bleeds, and its echoes are written in the cries of kings, queens, and lost princesses. This was the Fear Room. Don't forget to subscribe and like for more dark history tales.